I noticed this in myself too, and who kind of introduced me to this was Kevin Brown. I asked him, man, his spiccato was just so clean. I remember watching his Van Hall video, and I asked him, and he said, just, really, I kind of let my hips relax. I was like, okay, let me try that. It was a game changer.
I had such a great time hanging out with today's guest down in Tijuana for the 2018 Latin American Double Bass Festival. I'm Jason Heath. This is Contrabass Conversations, and Aaron Olguin, today's guest, he is totally one of the rising stars in the double bass world. He was the winner of the 2017 ISB International Society of Bassists solo competition, and he's won many other competitions throughout the years. We'll talk about that and many other topics. He'll be playing the opening recital for the 2019 ISB Convention, and he's the new principal bassist for the Trondheim Symphony in Norway. How exciting. And by the way, this is not the first time Aaron's been on the podcast. He was on the show a year and a half ago, maybe something like that, with his former group, Bassinova. So we talk a bit about that, but just about everything that he's up to. He's an inspiring artist and just the nicest guy you'll ever meet. I had such a great time doing this conversation, and I know you're going to enjoy it. Quick shout out to our sponsors, D'Addario Strings, Upton Bass, Steve Swan String Bass, Colstein Music, The Bass Violin Shop, and A440 Violin Shop. You'll hear more from them later in this episode. But let's dig into this conversation and feature a little bit of Aaron's wonderful playing. So here we are, without further ado, Aaron Olguin. In Tijuana, and here we are. We're hanging out with Gary Carr,
having a blast.
Andres Martin, so many great players. It's such a fun time being down here. It's great to have you down here.
It's great to see you. It's great to finally kind of be in your presence.
Well, but we were hanging out almost a year ago with you and the other members of Bassinova, talking about Bassinova in Texas, and you were competing in the Bradford competition, and that was also a few months after you had won the ISB solo competition, right?
Yes, it was a busy summer.
So so congratulations. And then I don't even know where to go, because you're also now, is it principal solo bass? What's the title?
Just principal bass.
Principal bass of the Trondheim Symphony in Norway, in the north of Oslo, right?
Yep, north of Oslo, yeah.
So
driving through the hills for 8 hours north of Oslo, But
and you're like the perfect person to have down here in Tijuana. First of all, because you're a fabulous player and great teacher and great guy, but also you are Mexican or partially Mexican. You're from, just tell me about your background, where you're from. I know you grew up down on the border. Tell me.
Yeah. So all of my grandparents have some direct lineage to Mexico, and both of my dad's grandparents are Mexican and came to the U.S. and are now U.S. citizens. And my mom's grandmother is from Mexico. And I'm not 100% sure about my grandpa. I'm pretty sure he's born in the U.S., raised in Mexico sort of thing, like my dad, which is exactly what happened to him. He was born in the Valley, and then he moved to Mexico when he was very young. And then he came back kind of towards middle school, and then went through high school, college, met my mom, they got married. And then I was born in Corpus Christi and lived there for maybe 1 year or something, and then McAllen 1 or 2 years, and then the rest of my childhood was in Brownsville, Texas. So I have a lot of experience learning English and Spanish at the same time. Some of my classes I still remember were taught to me in Spanish, and a lot of my colleagues, my students or my other friends there also spoke Spanish. So I grew up there, and then we moved to Dallas when I was in middle school. and my brother is basically raised in Dallas, and my sister was raised in the Valley for a little bit too. But so that's kind of where I kind of get the Hispanic blood. Yeah.
And the Valley is the Rio Grande Valley, right?
Yes, the Rio Grande Valley.
That's that whole McAllen, Texas. Brownsville is part of that, too?
Yeah.
Right? Okay.
Yeah.
You and I both know George Amarim, have George Amarim, a common friend. And so I've been down there for his festival. I know you have been down there.
Yeah, that time I went to the first time I went to the festival was when Joel Corrington was there. And it had been maybe 5 years since I had gone down to the Valley, so it was pretty nostalgic to kind of just get that feeling again. And it's so cool to see that the bass was spreading all the way down there. I mean, whenever I was in elementary school, I had no idea what an orchestra was. I had no idea that orchestral thing or anything to do with classical music existed. I mean, I heard it as a kid unknowingly, kind of in my subconscious kind of thing, but I didn't have a title to it or anything. And so when I moved to middle school, when I moved to Dallas for middle school, that's whenever I got exposed to that. Yeah.
Okay. And then guitar was happening early on.
Yes,
too,
guitar.
right?
Yeah, guitar happened in Brownsville.
Okay.
There was this program called Kids College, which was it was really cool. You can kind of go in, and it was always over the summer. I did it for 2 years, I think, 5th and 4th grade. And what we did was we kind of had a list of different things we could do. We could learn how to tie knots for whatever reason. That was something that you could do. We could learn to fish. We could learn to do a lot of outdoorsy. We could learn to dance. I mean, it was a giant list. And it was in an old rundown mall that had shut down because the mall moved across Brownsville. And I remember I was really, really into Eddie Van Halen.
All right.
Really, okay. I loved it. And I remember to this day, I'll never forget what I told my dad. We were walking down the street, and I was listening to Van Halen. He's like, hey, let's go for a walk. And so I did, and I told him, Dad, I want to be as good as Eddie Van Halen. Like, that's what I wanted to do. And so then I that summer, I remember I signed up for guitar lessons at this kid's college. And my dad showed me a few licks, and I was the only one that could play anything at that time. And he showed me the whole, Stand By Me, bum, 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 kind of thing. And so I learned the whole song, and I had the chords and everything, and they're like, wow, this guy's really advanced. And so what we ended up doing was we played the whole final concert doing Stand By Me, and I was the soloist for the thing. So I had very early on experience playing as a soloist, I guess, and it was kind of thrilling just playing in front of this like choir of guitars, playing just this melodic fragment. But it was then when I went to middle school, I took some private lessons, but that was my full-time thing. I mean, I was playing for hours every day, and then I got exposed to the double bass.
When did that happen?
This happened. Basically, I moved over the summer right before I got into middle school. So this was going into 6th grade. And whenever I got my schedule, I kind of called my mom right away because it had all of my core classes. And then I told them that I had wanted to do music. I told my mom that I wanted to do music. And got the schedule. And there it said band. Next to it said clarinet. And I was like, I know what a clarinet was, and I was like, I do not want to be putting anything in my mouth as an instrument. I'm sorry. So I called her right away, day one. I was like, Mom, I don't want to be in band. I don't know what to do, but I don't want to be in band. Is there anything else I can do? And she was like, okay, well, let me go over. So I remember she drove down. We lived really close. And she was like, okay, let's go to the counselor. We went to the counselor, and the counselor was like, okay, well, if you don't want to be in band, let me call the orchestra director. And I was like, orchestra? What's orchestra? And they're just like, okay, well, just call her in. She'll explain. So she came in, and which I'm still in touch with. Her name is Fawn Sorgi. Actually, we're still in contact, and so she's a fantastic friend of mine now. And she came in, and she kind of looked at me and introduced herself, and she's like, okay, so first thing we're going to do is see what instrument you're going to play. And she's like, let me see your hands. And so I put up my hands, and my hands were big at the time. She's like, okay, you're going to play the double bass. And I was like, what's a double bass? And she's like, well, come this way and I'll show you the double bass. And my mom went, of course, too. We opened the door and when I walked into the orchestra room, we saw the double bass, and my mom's eyes were just like, how are we going to carry this everywhere? And I was like, oh my goodness, what is this thing? And I just remember the double bass class. I still remember that. It was like maybe 9 or 10 double basses, and it was just a full load of double basses. I'm not sure if there was just a demonstration or something at the time, looking back, that kind of turned a lot of people on to the double bass, but there was more double basses than there were cellists.
Wow.
And I just remember it was so cool to just have a giant section, and my neighbor was also a double bassist. So he was in that lineup, and one of my best friends to this day, we met in that lineup playing together, double bass.
Wow.
Super cool, yeah.
Well, I always thought there's something in the water in Texas that makes good double bass players, or maybe Dallas, in particular. There's so many good players that have come out of there. It's
there's a pretty good amount of, I would say, I don't know, well, I'm not 100% sure, but I would assume that there's a lot of funding towards that.
Yeah.
Just because there's so many instruments and programs throughout the whole Dallas Metroplex. And as a college student, very recently, it was very beneficial for us. We can go to knock on any one of those schools' doors and just say, hey, we're if you want a double bass teacher or cello teacher or whatever, they would say, yeah, come in. We teach maybe 12, 10 students, sometimes, a little bit less, but the opportunities were there. And so it wasn't out of the picture, but I'm not sure what it is. I would assume that there's, like I said, the funding, but there's also a lot of awareness, because there are a lot of those demonstrations all the time of those instrument petting zoos or whatever, kind of come in and you have a teacher demonstrating all these instruments. So there's a lot of that activism happening throughout the Dallas Metroplex, and just kind of getting kids exposed to all the 4 instruments.
Yeah, there's no place like Texas for a lot of things, but for music education, it's unbelievable. There's no state that can even compare. I used to live in Illinois for a long time, taught in Illinois. Illinois is great, but I mean, Texas is a whole different scale. TMEA, the Texas Music Educators Association, has this conference. It's the biggest music educator gathering in the states. The Midwest Band and Orchestra Clinic in Chicago is the biggest in the world, or so they say, but TMEA is bigger. So it's really an incredible place.
Everything is bigger in Texas.
Yeah, that's for sure. So you're growing up there, and then you end up at UNT, and so how did you get from starting the bass to meeting Jeff Bradovich?
Oh man, this is a great story. I don't think I will ever forget this story. It's so among the many things that I think, not to say this egotistically, but to say this looking back retrospectively, especially, that I think I benefited from my personality, and I think that a lot of people who are kind of looking to find ways to kind of think about how to become a great, what is it about the great musicians, and I found a correlation was just curiosity. Mm-hmm. And one thing that I found super cool was this, how I met Bradovich. I was doing pretty well in middle school. I wasn't really practicing much, just sort of typical middle school life, and playing a lot of guitar and causing way too much trouble. And went to high school, and my freshman year, we have this program called Solo and Ensemble. And I did this all through middle school as well, and you kind of play a solo, and you can play an ensemble, and you get graded. And in Texas, you get, I think, a 1 is a good score, 2, and you can go all the way down to like 4 or something. Mm-hmm. And I think you have to get like a 2 to kind of pass, and I think a 3 and 4 is getting a little spooky in the grade area. And my freshman year, I got this award called Outstanding Soloist. And what that award is basically that judge awards one student from her room, his or her room, this award for the best soloist in that whole room, and that can even include high schoolers too. Sometimes middle schoolers will go in the room, so it's a little bit harder for them, but possible. And I got it my freshman year, and I was like, wow, I'm doing pretty good at this. I really like it, and And I really liked the solo I was playing. I was playing Eccles.
Okay.
Not Eccles, Marcello Sonata, one of the Marcello sonatas that I play sometimes even today for ornamentation. Anyways, so I was looking into the double bass online, and I remember seeing videos of Rabath and Gary Carr, and just being like, wow, these guys are awesome, you know. So I started practicing a little bit more. I didn't really get private lessons for the next 2 years after that, sophomore and junior year, but it was on my radar to kind of get outstanding soloist every year. Mm-hmm. I didn't. Sophomore year didn't work. Junior, senior year, I did. So I ended up, I remember my sophomore year, I was auditioning for Allstate. This was my first year. I was like, okay, I got outstanding soloist my junior year, and I want to try Allstate. Let's just give it a shot. And I remember getting tons of these excerpts and etudes and everything, and just grinding away for way too long, and just was making some strides, you know, but nothing too big. And I was just like, okay, you know what? I need to find a teacher. And so I went online, and I was kind of curious who was teaching in the area. And I was like, okay, well, let me just look at the local university. What was the closest university to me? And it was UNT. So at this time, they still had office phones, you know. So I went on the website, and I saw the double bass professor there was Jeff Bratitich. So I just called his office. It's like, I was just this little, 17, 16-year-old kid. I was like, hi, my name is Aaron Olguin. I live in Denton, in the Colony, Texas, and I'm just curious if I can get some lessons from you. And
what did he say?
He was just like, oh, so you're a double bass player, and blah, blah, and this and that. And he's like, well, I have a full schedule, but I can refer you to Gudrun Russian. Mm-hmm. She just opened up a Dallas, he said at the time, she just opened up a conservatory. I think she'd be more than happy to have you in it. I can put you in contact. And the rest was history. After that, I kind of just snowballed into the bass world, and it just kept growing and growing. And soon enough, I switched all of my attention to double bass, and kind of stopped playing guitar, and it became my real passion.
So that was right around 17, kind of end of high school.
Yeah.
And then you end up at UNT, but were there other things on the horizon for you, or was it just sight set on UNT for that undergrad?
Yes. I really did want to study with Bratitich.
Yep.
I did a little bit of research, not too much, though, on other schools, but I did know that the things I was interested in, I knew that Bratitich could kind of like guide me, and the way that he was teaching me whenever I would get some lessons from him every now and then whenever Gudrun couldn't teach, and thankfully he did. The way that he taught me was it was so easy to understand, and I was improving very quickly every lesson that I had with him. And I knew that's somebody I wanted to be around. Very, very warm-hearted guy, and really understanding and kind of really insightful, had so many good resources for me to look into. And I was like, this is the guy I really want to study with, And it was nice to also luckily have UNT in my backyard. I was 45 minutes away. So I had the Juilliard of the South in my backyard and not even know it in high school. So it was kind of an easy choice for me. I did apply to some other schools. I don't remember. I kind of just sent in applications and never auditioned once I got in.
A question I like to ask people on the podcast is, what advice would they give their 18-year-old self? And here's Barry Kolstein of Kolstein & Sons answering that very question.
I think as an 18-year-old and, or even in my early 20s coming into the shop, everything like that, a lot of it was laid out for me. There was a plan, that I was given a plan, which I often say I've done a good job, and I'm proud of what I've done with the shop, and I continue to be proud. But, I was given an opportunity, and I always respect self-made people, that weren't given that opportunity. It's what you do with the opportunity.
Barry has been providing bassists with opportunities through beautiful instruments, bows, cases, you name it. He's been doing this himself for 50 years, and the shop is celebrating their 70th year in business. Thank you so much for what you do, Barry. Check them out at Kolstein.com, and thank you for sponsoring the podcast. This episode is brought to you by Steve Swan String Bass. And Steve has been researching top regraduation for many years. Here's Steve on the topic.
I found some old diagrammed bass tops in an old violin making book that had violins, violas, cellos, and only 4 basses from kind of the classic period, the early 1800s. And I took a pattern of kind of a topographical map of thicker in the center under the bridge, and then, the thinnest is right near the edges, just before it flares out and gets strong again. And I put in some measurements that I thought would work, and we use that as a general pattern for top regraduation, and it really works.
You would be amazed how well this technique works. I've been impressed time and time again at how immediately a bass speaks after coming from Steve's shop, and how resonant and beautiful and open the sound is. Learn more at steveswanstringbass.com, and thanks for sponsoring the podcast, Steve. Consistency among bass lines, consistency among the different products you offer, that's something that Upton Bass excels at. Here are Gary and Eric from Upton Bass on that topic.
Continuity of product, which we have fabulous reputation. We've got great product across the marketplace.
Do you have seconds? No.
Right, yeah, exactly. No.
Seconds are in the dumpster.
For almost 20 years, Upton Bass has been delivering top-notch basses at every price point, consistency and continuity, like Gary said, across the line. And if the wood's not good, like Eric said, it goes in the dumpster. They are the real deal, made in America. Learn more at uptonbass.com, and thanks for sponsoring the podcast.
Indeed.
Well, you're taking me back to when I was the end of high school, because Aaron and I have a lot in common in terms of that. I also worked with Jeff Braditich, another place. That was when he was still at Northwestern. But I remember that first Braditich masterclass. I'm walking into Northwestern, and I open the Regenstein Recital Hall doors. And I hear this resonant voice talking about resonance, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah, which I'm sure you've also heard out plenty over there. But I was just totally captivated. A parent made a video of Jeff playing a recital after that summer, and I went back to South Dakota, and I watched that video every day after high school. And I learned every piece that he played off of the video. I just came back the next summer, and I was like this weird video learning dude who is, and so I totally identify with that. And if you could describe, and I love doing this with people who've studied with people like Jeff, describe Jeff as a teacher. What are some favorite memories, or his style, or anything for someone who might not have worked with him?
I would say the one thing that I've noticed watching a lot of master classes over the years is just how much patience he has. It's really, really remarkable. Whenever I was younger, I had some anger management issues, and I feel like my siblings and I we would always get in fights and everything. So I feel like going into conversations like that, I would assume that whenever I would come unprepared, that a teacher would be just railing me, just growing up, with that sort of environment and personality. But I just remember walking into all of my lessons and him just being so open-minded and so welcoming and so patient. Really, really patient, and knowing when to speak, knowing what to say at the right time. And I think that really helped me kind of know that it's okay to kind of be critical. It's okay to kind of not be angry in my head whenever things go wrong, So that's something that I learned a lot from him, to really have patience, especially in the practice room, and to really calm things down, slow it down, and find different ways to look at it. And he's really, really good at that. And I mean, of course, there were times that I showed up unprepared, and he just had a way of being able to get through that lesson, not to get through it, but to be as productive as possible. And was really aware of how to do that. And of course, his years of experience have really guided him through that, and him being very aware of his experiences with the students have I'm sure shaped that.
Oh, yeah. Well, so I'm picturing young Aaron playing that guitar, playing that solo, right? You're like soloist, like budding soloist, and you're winning your outstanding soloist awards at this young age, and then you're at UNT studying with someone who wears many hats, Jeff Braditich, but we know him very much as a soloist, So was that what you were thinking?
That's all I knew.
That's all you knew.
I had no idea that the double bass was primarily used in an orchestra. I only saw videos of Gary Carr and Raboth and Mark Morton and Braditich and you name it. These were the videos that I grew up with, and that's kind of my exposure. So I would only type in name of bass player, next to it solo, but I wouldn't stumble across many name of bass player excerpts or name of bass player orchestra. I wasn't even listening to orchestral music in high school until really late. My orchestra director kind of exposed me to that a little bit. Bart Gent, also an incredible inspiration to me to this day as well. Just so supportive, especially in my high school years, staying after with me and kind of working on excerpts and working for the university audition, things like that. But he kind of exposed me to that. But like I mentioned, that's all I knew. So I was like, okay, I want to be a soloist, so I should go study with Braditich. And so just from the get-go, that was my intention. And I, of course, Braditich talked to me a little bit about it and exposed me to that, and Gudrun did too. But I was still really turned on about being a soloist, and I was like, okay, that's going to be my path. So I kind of set my focus to doing competitions and thinking the way the other string instruments do, which is still my kind of like go-to thought. What would the cellist mindset be? What would the pianist mindset be? And thinking about how to incorporate all of that into my playing as a double bassist. Not thinking about my instrument, but thinking about the music. And so yeah, that was kind of my foresight with my instrument.
Well, it's really interesting. I mean, I find this a fascinating topic, and I think that this has changed over the years. But like, if we go back 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, there's most certainly a divide with double bass soloist and orchestral player, right? I think that's and then here you are, you just won a principal bass gig. I've been listening to you all week, like cranking through excerpts as well as you obviously are a fabulous orchestral player. So, but you much of your training was focused on being a solo player. But the interesting thing, I love your thoughts on this, because I think that it's bass players that they're exception. If you look at violinists and cellists and other instruments, they train themselves to become great instrumentalists and expressive instrumentalists. And typically, traditionally, violinists and cellists come to excerpts way later than bass players. That's something that they do near the end of their training. They're working on technique, they're working on repertoire, and the excerpts come in. We bass players, I started working on Beethoven 5 when I was like 14, right? And so I've always... I've sort of someone, I can't tell you how many sections I've sat in and people like roll their eyes and say, oh, soloist, but I don't think that's the case anymore. I think we're bass player. I know. What are your thoughts on that decades long thorny issue?
Yeah, well, I think Nina de Cesar really she kind of put out this really wonderful kind of, I don't know what we would call it, maybe like a little blog post or something on Facebook saying this isn't an us versus them conversation. Yeah. It isn't. It really shouldn't be that. We're all here to play music, and we have every right to play whatever music we want. If we were to take out orchestra, if we were to take out solo, and the double bass was sitting in front of us, and we had no idea that there was a divide or anything, and somebody was just handed this instrument, they're going to fiddle on it, they're going to mess around, they're going to take, let's just say rock and roll was in the room and they heard that, they're going to try to do it on that, then they're going to find inspiration, they might compose, they might explore other facets of it. But I don't think they would say, well, okay, I am going to approach it as an orchestral player. Yes, it wouldn't be a thought in their head. Yeah. That's not something they would think about. And as an orchestral player, you're playing incredible music all the time, and it's important to have a musical perspective, to have this very music enhancing, especially since you're in the orchestra, you're enriching the orchestra with this sound, right? And it's a musical sound. It's not an orchestral sound, You're approaching it as a musician to have that forte with vibrato, to have great bow control, all of that. That's a part of being a musician, not an orchestral player. And so that's why I really agree with Nina. This is not an us versus them conversation. And I'm sure there was divides reading about it. But I really love what Paul Brun said at the very beginning of his book. You know, he kind of went on this quote talking about, and of course this was back a long time ago. I don't remember what treatise he quoted, but they were talking about how double basses were kind of coming into development, and somebody mentioned that the double bass should be played just like the violins and the gambas. It shouldn't have an estranged practice. And I think he said that because at the time the instrument was pretty hard to play, and so they had to have very specific techniques to get around it, which we still do have today, which is understandable because of the size. But what I thought of it, though, was the perspective. I didn't take it so much as a physicality. I took it more as that perspective, because we shouldn't have a estranged mental practice that's different from the cellist or the violinist. It should all be about music. We should not take an excerpt and say, okay, you know, orchestral. No, think, what is this music trying to say? How am I going to enhance the orchestra? And I think that's what the jury wants to hear. They want to hear a performance when you go and play for them out there and playing those excerpts, you know? It's, of course, you have to be in time. Of course, you have to be in tune, all of that. No doubt about that. But they want to hear a musician, especially for a principal job, especially, I mean, even for an orchestral section job. It's absolutely super important, you know?
Yeah, and I think that your perspective is definitely the norm, especially for the under 40 crowd. You know, people that have come in and are working professionally. I think that us versus them is more of an older generation thing. I might be the tail end of that older generation, like you know. But I do think that that's, if we look at here in the States, people like Nina or Ted Botsford or Jory Herman, all these other fabulous players that have jobs here in the United States. They're also fantastic soloists. They're, you know, it's changing. It's an old paradigm, yeah. I think. And
it's cool because whenever I talk to someone like Nina, or whenever I talk to a little bit like somebody like Nina, or especially like Sam Suggs,
yeah,
or Lauren Pierce, you know, they just loved playing that music. Mm-hmm. It wasn't like, I'm going to be a soloist, walk down that road, and here's my jacket for that road. It's that's what they love doing too, and of course. And they also love playing in orchestra, and so they do at times, you know. But it wasn't like, I'm going to be a soloist and they turn my back to orchestral playing, you know. I mean, they're all involved in it somehow, you know. And I think they benefit each other all the time. The roads cross and in every way possible, I would say.
Well, and Aaron and I have been talking about his path freshman year through his time at North Texas, and he ended up doing his master's at North Texas, and how competitions, you know, solo competitions have played into his path and his development. Can you just talk through some of the milestones in terms of competitions you've done, and maybe how they shaped you as a player, or how they shaped your perspective on music, or your practice toward those events?
Yeah. The one thing I learned doing competitions, the one big thing I learned was not to create doubt in the listener. And I remember just sometimes at competitions, I'd look up and they're just looking at their notepad, taking notes, and like, oh man, I must have did something wrong. What was it? You know? And so looking back and listening to the recordings of those, well, probably illegally putting them in my pocket, recording it and then listening back. I just remember I remember that spot. She was looking at her notes and just making, you know, writing frantically, or, you know, frowning, or just kind of like looking stressed or something. What was it about my playing? And I would listen back, and maybe it was pitch, maybe it was rhythm or something. But I remember whenever I did do well, and I looked up and the jury was just looking at you smiling, or the audience was just captivated by what you were able to do. I remember just being in the flow of the music. Things were moving well. I remember I was in time. I remember I was in tune. I remember I wasn't looking so much at my instrument. I remember I was free. I was relaxed. And I just remember just making that discovery. The moment that I create doubt in the listener, they're not going to want to hear. Well, the doubt is basically like points off. You know, doubt in tempo. Oh, I'm not sure. Ambiguous phrasing, ambiguous pitch. those sort of ambiguous bowings. If you kind of do a bowing that doesn't make sense, or you're kind of skipping your lines and things like that, or rushing, all of that, it creates doubt. And I knew that was something that at that point that I wanted to not do, to not have doubt. And so whenever I went to do an orchestral audition, I just took that mindset. I didn't think at all about I'm doing an orchestral thing. Here's a totally different mindset. All I did was did the same thing, absolutely the same thing. I remember I didn't want to expose myself to a different mindset at all on purpose. I just said, I'm going to go in there, I'm going to play just as musically. I'm going to go in there and I'm going to play without creating any doubt, as much doubt as I can avoid to create in the audition, and create the same mindset, go in there, play as a musician, and feel like a recital. It really did.
Yeah, and that's a key thing that so many people have talked about, is approach it like you're playing a solo performance, which you are, by the way. You are playing a recital of snapshots of pieces, little vignettes of pieces, but it is, and there really shouldn't be that separation. It's not a separate thing. It's prepare it and play beautifully. And I love that you use recording like that. And I saw Aaron played a wonderful solo recital here, and he's going to play again tomorrow night. And it struck me, because I haven't seen this so much, but the day before his recital, I saw him in the bass room. Pardon me. That's why I have editors. We were. And he had his headphones on, seemed like for a big chunk of the day, just listening. And so what were you listening to, and what were you listening for? And maybe talk about just how recording yourself and listening back plays into your preparation process.
Sure. Well, it's kind of, for me, it's usually like a twofold thing. You can use it for a lot of other things. There's so many other ways to kind of dive into a recording that you made of yourself. But it's two things. One is like the sort of mental practice thing, and I'm listening not so critically in this with this kind of screen in my head. What I listen to me kind of going through it. I kind of imagine myself playing the string. I kind of imagine myself playing with my left hand, and I can associate that sound with emotions, and I'm closing my eyes and I'm imagining I'm playing it. And so I'm not touching my instrument, but it's according to some research, it's processed in the exact same part of the brain right before it goes into the actual motion of it. So it's all you're practicing it, except you're just not doing it in that final step of actually moving, right? And so that's one thing I really do, so I can kind of get my brain, warmed up to the motion. And then in the other way I listen to it, I kind of just focus in and just kind of see on things I want to fix, especially phrasing, where I think I'm doing, and especially when I'm performing, this happens so many times. I'm getting to the top of a phrase, and I'm about to get there, and I arrive, and I think I'm there forever, and then I go on and I finish the phrase, and I listen back every time. I'm like, man, I need to be there longer. It was hardly nothing. It was, in the heat of the moment, it feels like a lot, but whenever you're stepping back from it, it feels like your perspective is very different. So I listen for those little details to kind of like trim the edges of the performance, to kind of get my phrases in line. If there's major pitch issues, if maybe there are rhythm issues, bowing articulation, etc. I kind of make those mental notes to kind of go in and fix those whenever I'm warming up before, or whenever I go to perform.
Do you record every day when you practice? Or is it like every once in a while? How does that work for you?
I think I've been making it a habit now to record a lot more.
Okay.
And listening back. And whenever I do listen sort of in the same kind of two categories. Mm-hmm. Usually in the more critical category whenever I'm in practice, and whenever I'm going into a performance, I start listening more, kind of getting into the motions. But usually very critically whenever I'm just recording a small segment or something, and just kind of trimming things up.
I love recording. I hate recording because it's so honest, but I love it because it's so useful. And if you get into that groove of just knowing that's what you sound like, and David Moore at USC at LA Phil Basses talks about it's like smelling your own excrement. It says inhale deeply,
That's
and
good.
and that's that's what it is. But it's extremely useful. It's probably the most useful thing I found for me anyway personally. Jumping around a little bit, but since we're talking about recording, Aaron and I both use this app, and if I forget, the name of it is Tonal Energy, and I will try to link up to it, but I sometimes forget. So if I forget, apologies. Tonal Energy, iOS and Android. And Aaron was showing me all of this. Like, I've been using this app for years, and he uses it's like 10 levels above what I was doing on it. And he and I were doing I don't know what we call harmonic analysis of how sound post tension affects the sound. And it's really good. So that's like one of a bunch of things. So tell me about Tonal Energy and how you use it.
Yeah, so Tonal Energy is this really cool app that I've been using a lot. Don't remember who turned me onto it. Actually, Fawn Sorgi turned me onto this. That's who it was.
Okay, wow.
So big shout out to her again. We had lunch right before I went to go do the Trondheim audition. We got lunch for the first time, and I haven't seen her since middle school, or no, since high school, late high school. Anyways, we got lunch, and she showed me this app because she's like, I really like it when the smiley face comes up whenever you're in tune.
Yep.
And then she's like, you can also do this and this and this, whatever. And it had a metronome, and I hated having to switch back to another app for a metronome. And so it kind of had it all. And I kind of looked into it some more and realized how many different things you can do on it. One thing I really love to do that you can do right at the beginning in the tuner setting is you can hold a note. Let's say you have a major chord. Okay, you can hold and sustain each one of those notes. You can even change the octave of what note is being sustained. And you can change the temperament from equal or just. Mm-hmm. So I'm constantly using it to, if I have a piece in like D major, for example, and there's like a big run or a big shift in D major, I'll set it to usually equal temperament if I'm playing piano. But if I'm playing by myself, or if I'm playing with a string group, I set it to just intonation, because there the thirds are tuned differently and the fifth spacing is slightly different. So I will always kind of change that accordingly to kind of get that sound in my ear and adjust my spacing as I go along. So it's a really cool way to kind of work on pitch. The other thing you can do is kind of just check out the harmonic series. You can play a single note on it, and it'll give you a reading of all of the partials that come up and the strength of the partials. And the one thing I really found it to be really useful for was, I was this summer I was in Orford, and Nicholas Walker he kind of made a comment mentioning how Heifetz was very aware of which part of the string he was playing in to get it, because he wanted to get specific sounds for specific sections, and he was very particular about it. And so he would either play closer to the bridge or closer to the fingerboard. And he also mentioned that he discovered that if you play on the partial, like let's say if you're playing G harmonic, and if you play your bow on the G harmonic up in the fifth or sixth octave, it's going to ring a little better. Yeah. If you play on the third slightly higher, it's going to ring. It's going to have a different harmonic series analysis. Same thing with the D. And so I was constantly using it to kind of see what kinds of partials I was getting and kind of starting to apply them. And the spaces are so small. But if you kind of get an idea of what to do and the different sounds and what comes out of your instrument, you can kind of start messing around with colors a lot. Yeah. And so this is a really cool app to kind of do that, to kind of see what's going on and if there's anything actually happening. Sometimes there isn't, and I think there is. But you can kind of just see, what's going on, and just to kind of get an idea of how you can play around with the sound that you're getting in a solo or something. You can really be experimental. It's really cool.
It is so cool. And you also were using it. You can turn on vibrato. And you can practice vibrato.
That's right.
And I know you've done that. And Aaron, by the way, will include audio, and you should definitely go up and listen to Aaron play online. But he has one of the most exquisite vibratos I've heard, and all these variety of colors. And I mean, it's really amazing. And I know it's also something that you're working on all the time.
Yeah, I'm really self-conscious about my vibrato. I've always been told it's too fast, and I'm still trying to get it slower. And I think even the recording, especially, this is another thing I use for recordings for, he's listening to my vibrato. I'm like, okay, I finally got a slow vibrato. Listen back. I'm like, wow, that is so fast. Why? And so I'm experimenting all the time with the fleshy part of my finger, collapsed fingers in the lower area to see how that works, how much flesh should be on in thumb position, where my thumb is in thumb position, if it's angled a certain way, and just kind of getting all of that. And so that all plays into tone colors. And the cool thing about this app is whenever you go onto that it's called the sound wheel. Mm-hmm. You can kind of select the pitch that you want to be sustained. You can turn on, there's a little setting right in front of it that says vibrato. And of course the machine has perfect vibrato. Right. It's like this perfect speed, and it oscillates up to the note, and it's like, it's great. And so I always try to match it, and it makes so much sense when you're playing a scale with vibrato, because you want to kind of get a perfect vibrato in your head. And as you're going through the notes, you can kind of make sure that you're matching. The vibrato isn't too wide. It isn't going above the note, from the note and above, those sorts of things. So it really helps to kind of get your ear in line and the spacing in line while using vibrato in faster passages or in what have you.
This episode is brought to you by the A440 Violin Shop. It's located just down the street from Wrigley Field in beautiful Chicago on the north side, just off the Brown line. I have been going there my entire adult life, and they have been fantastic, both for repairs. I've had cracks repaired. I've had seams glued. I've had all sorts of students go to A440 to get instruments, to get bows. They're available with a smile, do wonderful work, and definitely check them out if you are in the Midwest. A440violinshop.com, and thanks for sponsoring the podcast. This episode is brought to you by the Bass Violin Shop, which opened in 2001 as a small double bass workshop in Greensboro, North Carolina. Today, they're staffed by 3 full-time, highly skilled bass luthiers, and they specialize in double bass sales, rentals, setup, restoration, and repair. For nearly 20 years, they have satisfied thousands of clients by offering quality instruments, knowledgeable service, reliable repairs, and superior restorations at affordable prices. They proudly offer the largest variety of fine basses and bows in the Southeast. You can find something at every price point by makers such as Thomas Martin, Bill Lakeberg, Romano Solano, Lemur Music, all Shen models, K, Epiphone, and bows by Louis Morizot, Fuchs, Nürnbergo, Arcos Brazil, and others. For more information and current inventory, visit their website at bassviolinshop.com, and be sure to follow them on Facebook and Instagram. A struggle that people who teach young bass students, and there are more and more of us every day that are doing this, a struggle that these folks have is finding strings for these small basses, the 16th size basses and even smaller. Here's Kate Jones, who is a Suzuki bass specialist, on how she's enjoyed using D'Addario's fractional helicore strings.
Recently, I've had the opportunity to try out D'Addario's new 1/10/1/16 crossover size string for fractional basses. The things that I love about this string is that it's got a beautiful tone, and for tiny humans, the strings have to be easy to push down, which these strings are, and also they're easy to bow for them. You don't have to use a lot of arm weight. So overall, I think this has been a really exciting string for my studio.
Learn more at contrabassconversations.com/strings, and thanks to D'Addario for sponsoring the podcast. Well, since we're getting into the geeky bass weeds here, there's something else I want to dig into, and okay. we should really, if we have time this week, we should really film a video about this, because there's so Aaron, in his masterclass here, or it was your technique class, actually. It was your technique class at the very beginning of the week, started busting out these spiccato strokes. And it was like the whole group was hypnotized. All the students here just like surrounded were like watching. And you had one of the best, cleanest, clearest descriptions of just like how the strokes work for you. And I know describing it is not maybe the best way to do it, but maybe it is. Or we can take a stab at it. Can you just talk about how you approach the various types of off-the-string strokes, or maybe what you were talking about with these students?
Yeah, so I've always been trying to this is something I did do once, was kind of slow down recording. I don't remember. It was a while back of a bass player with great, because it was probably that Hal Robinson excerpt video. You know, he just kind of went
grainy
through.
video from
Like
right.
Braditich was holding the mic. You know, the good old days. And I remember I slowed it down, or it was, I don't know if it was that one. Anyways, but I slowed it down. I listened to the length of each note, and I remember them sounding like pizzicatos. With the bow, and so I was like, okay, well, I need a pitch with the bow, so I just kind of approached it as pizzicato, and that pulling motion of the string was kind of my bass line for this concept, and then I kind of went into detail in my head a little bit about bouncing, you know, with the natural bounce of the bow, and I was playing French bow at the time, and I still do for a lot of my excerpts. And just kind of getting an idea of how to get the bow to bounce very naturally. And I kind of always approach the things I do on the bass, and I always relate it to things I do every day. All things that we're used to, because that's what our body is used to. That's what it can relate to, something relatable. And Braditich and Gudrun introduced me to this bouncing the ball aspect. You know, whenever you have a basketball, I mean, if you're listening now, just take a moment. If you're driving, don't do this, please. But if you're bouncing a basketball, just kind of feel that motion going up and down, and just feeling the vibrations go through your whole body. And you're sitting here without your instrument, probably relaxed, absolutely no tension in your hips, especially no tension in your shoulder, and you're just bouncing your arm, and you can feel that whole reverb through your body. And whenever you're doing the spiccato, it's very similar. I feel like whenever I'm pulling that motion, whenever I grab the string with my bow, that moment it grabs and I release, I feel that instant reverb throughout my body. Whenever I release the string and I let the string go and it goes up into the air, I just feel it go through my body. And I noticed that in a lot of whenever I'm teaching, that the hips are so tight. And I noticed this in myself too, and who kind of introduced me to this was Kevin Brown. I asked him, man, his spiccato was just so clean. I remember watching his Van Hall video, and I asked him, and he said, just, you know, really, I kind of let my hips relax. And I was like, okay, let me try that. And I was like, man, it was a game changer. It was a huge game changer. I had no idea there was tension coming from my hips that was affecting my arm, but it makes sense. The energy needs to go all the way down to your feet on the floor, and if you have something stopping that energy, you can get that arm to be relaxed, because it's just mirrors throughout your body. Your right hand's going to want to do what the left hand's doing. Your hips are going to want to do what your arms are doing. Your arms are going to want to do what your hips are doing, right? So if they're locked and tense, if your body is locked and tense somewhere else, your arms are going to want to reciprocate that, you know? So that's kind of what I was demonstrating, was whenever I pulled the string, I kind of did it in like a exaggerated jerking fashion, and I teach it in exaggerated motions. I exaggerate the motion. I feel like I'm just kind of like throwing my arm after I grabs the string, and I just feel this reverb, and the same thing on the up bow. Just throwing it, and I feel this reverb throughout my body, and as I start moving faster and faster, that motion gets smaller and smaller, the reverb gets more refined, but it's never locked up anywhere. It's never kind of, there's not a tense moment whenever I'm releasing the string. It's all coming from a relaxed, relatable bouncing motion that we do all the time, throwing basketballs and bouncing basketballs.
Yeah, I remember you saying that it was kind of like doing a hula hoop.
Oh yeah.
And I remember seeing all the students here. They're like, "Oh, hula hoop!" And so I think that my quartet here, I started talking about that with them. I was like, "Oh, you remember Aaron with the hula hoop?"
That's the other. That's one of the other. Thank you for reminding me. It's whenever you kind of do that jerking motion, your hips go in the opposite direction.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. And the same thing whenever you're doing the up bow and you kind of jerk your body in the up bow direction, your hips go in the opposite direction. So it's kind of like that hula hoop. Whenever the hula hoop is kind of like on your left hip, the open end of it, the energy, you know, is kind of locked up behind you, right? And so it's kind of always spinning around you in the opposite area of where the motion is happening. So when you do the down bow, the energy is reverbed all the way to your left hip. Right? And then the same thing with the up bow. Whenever you do the up bow, the energy is swung to your right hip. So it's this like hula hoop kind of transferring of energy whenever you're doing the down bow and the up bow, and it gets smaller and more refined as you go faster and faster. Yeah.
I love how experimental. So you know, so Aaron, he already mentioned he plays French bow, but he also plays German bow.
Yes.
And you know, I've seen Aaron sit, but then he played on my recital a couple nights ago, standing. I think you were standing last night too. Yeah. So you're very open and flexible to different things. How do you think standing, sitting, French bow, German bow? Why do you mix it up like that?
I feel like I'm ever since, especially Bratitich, he kind of never tells me. There was only a few times where he kind of really told me, just do it this way, learn it, and you can kind of walk outside of that whenever you get the hang of it, with a lot of technique. But there were also a lot of things where I just felt so, kind of uncomfortable with, and I still do to this day. But especially Bratitich kind of got me into thinking about looking at it from all the different angles and taking that into your practice room. Yeah. You know, instead of waiting for him to tell me whenever I was, he never told me what I just said, but I kind of got that from his lessons. And so there's just so many little things that I'm always, this end pin height, to this day, I have no idea where I want it.
That's good. Neither do I. Yeah. So I feel better.
Yeah. And the angle, where on my hip am I putting the inside of the instrument? You know, how much angle, how tall is this? It's just constantly evolving, and I've kind of had this curiosity factor since early college years, really thinking about it all the time. And there were a lot of things that I couldn't really fix, with French bow personally, because of my natural body physics, if you will. For solo playing, that I had really wanted to kind of get these long legato lines that I couldn't really get the sustain in my bow. So I was like, okay, well let me just see what it feels like to play German bow and see if I can kind of relate it back to the French bow whenever I get the hang of it. And so whenever I did, I noticed it was a nice pulling. It was so natural that for some reason it was so much more natural to pull this way. So I would always go back to the French bow and reapply it. But then at one point I was like, well, why don't I just play it? Why don't I just stick with it, you know? And of course there has its own tricky things. Like for example, spiccato is still, for me it's not the best thing in the world. So I'm still working on it. I'm still working on it a lot. But so that I always relate back, to the French bow. It's a natural thing bouncing the basketball. It's a very unnatural thing almost to kind of bounce with the German bow in some ways. So yeah, I'm just kind of experimenting with that all the time and kind of interrelating. Most of the time it was just interrelating things to each other. What was it about standing that I like so much that I want to apply to sitting, and vice versa? What was it about sitting that I like so much about standing? And kind of just in the practice, I always just kind of mess around. I won't ask myself really deep questions until I kind of got the hang of what I wanted to get the hang of, and then I kind of break it down. Most of it is what Gary Carson, but proprioceptive.
Yeah, proprioceptive.
Yeah. Most of it is just kind of this kinesthetic kind of feeling, and then analyzing it in retrospect. Mm-hmm. But kind of just turning the brain off, just getting a feel for it. Oh, that feels great. Well, why does it feel good? And just going from there. But so just a lot of things were working for me on German bow right away, especially for solo playing, and that's kind of why I switched to that primarily for solo playing. Just because, especially that, like I mentioned just a second ago, just that pulling motion was so much more natural, and I could really sustain a lot easier. And since a lot of the faster passages in solo playing, you want them to project a little bit more, they're a little bit on into the string.
Yes.
So you don't have to do much bouncing, at least off the string bouncing. A lot of it's stick bouncing. Right. So I was able to kind of do that pretty quickly. I was able to apply concepts from French bow onto that very quickly. But off the string, obviously, like I mentioned, was a little bit trickier for me. But.
Well, I think it's really helpful to hear how experimental and exploratory you are in terms of that, because I think people feel like there's some magic set up for them, and that life will be good when they find that, or that they're locked into something. But I've always been kind of a experimenter myself, so it's great to hear that someone who's having the success you're having is exploring like that. And there's so many things we could talk about, but I wanna. Can you tell us about your ISB recital? So you're playing
the one coming up?
You're the opening, headliner, opening night recital.
Okay.
International Society Bassists Convention, 2019, Bloomington, Indiana. So I know you probably don't have it set in stone yet, but can you give us a...
Well, I can guarantee you that at least 50% of the notes will be correct.
Okay.
I will...
That's
let's see. So I coming from those 2 incredible years with Bassinova, I really wanted to kind of carry on that chamber music tradition that we kind of helped kind of restart a little bit. Not taking all the credit, but it's always been a scene, but kind of really challenging and really precise sort of playing the way we did, and the really intense training that we had, and just kind of really thinking outside of the box was kind of something I wanted to bring into solo playing a little bit, and just kind of showing the different ways the double bass can be applied to the chamber music field. So I'm going to for sure play Brahms's first piano trio, the third movement and the first movement. And it kind of goes into all parts of the bass, which is what I really liked about it. It really goes up into that 5th octave, and you have to play a lot of closed notes. And getting control of that has kind of been a challenge for me, and thinking about the sound that I want up there, and sort of creating a nice projecting warm sound and not a very choked sound. It's something I've worked on a lot, and I think this piece, once kind of mastered in that area, can sound so full, and it really works so well on the double bass, and whenever you're playing in that area, especially, which is one of the big reasons why I wanted to play this piece, whenever you're playing in that octave on the double bass, it has such a different quality than playing in that octave on the cello. The cello doesn't have as many overtones as we get whenever we're playing there, and it rings so nicely, and I think the double bass has such a beautiful singing range there that isn't explored too much. So I wanted to kind of show that in this piece, with this piece. And one of the other pieces that I will for sure play is Fantasiestück by Wolfram Wagner, which is Dominic Wagner's father. And it's a fantastic trio for clarinet, double bass, and piano, but I'm going to arrange it for violin and double bass and piano. It's not much arranging, just kind of reading it. But I think it's sounding great. It's a beautiful piece, and I think it's needs to be heard. Yeah. So I wanted to play that. And the other 2 I'm kind of still debating a little bit, but I'm kind of thinking for sure I'm going to play a work by Andreas Martin. I'm not going to say what, because they're kind of like 3 in the works of what I'm going to play. But definitely wanted to get as many living composers in there as possible, and here in Tijuana exploring a lot of Andreas Martin's music, and having had explored Andreas Martin's music has been so inspiring. And to be alive whenever we have a gem like that, that we can be around and experience, and to ask questions to, and to explore music with, is really, really an honor. And I think all of us are extremely grateful to have Andreas Martin here with us, and to be pumping out incredible music, all the time. And so I definitely want to play a piece of music by him. One of the 3 in mind, I'm not sure, but I'm still kind of debating. So yeah, that's kind of my plan right now.
Well, I'll be there. I hope as many of you as possible listening will be there too. Aaron Olguin, who's a Texas guy who's moving to Norway in the dead of winter. So I can't wait to hear about that. We got to talk about that once you get some time under your belt there. And it's just so exciting. And you're a relatively young guy, so it's kind of a funny question to ask. But go back to like day 1 freshman year, Aaron, let's say UNT or somewhere thereabouts. Give him a little advice. You're only 6-ish years out from that, but if you could go back a bit, talk to slightly younger Aaron. Anything you might share?
One thing I do think about all the time that I'm still influenced by is don't be afraid to do something that people around you would look down on you for. Mm-hmm. I was so... almost everything I did was what my friends thought of me, like how I would dress, or how I looked, how I would talk, but I did it for everyone else. But it's so many so many times I catch myself doing that, and I think especially with double bass, even, I'm not saying this to revolt against your teacher, that's not my point, but even whenever your teacher says something, or whenever you're doing something for your teacher, you want to ask yourself, are you benefiting yourself from that, And how, is it inspiring to you to do that sort of thing? If your teacher says something, apply it and then add it to your toolbox, and then ask yourself, how am I going to make it a part of me? How can I be experimental with this? How can I think outside of the box? How can I benefit myself? And basically, it's okay to be a nerd. It's okay. I mean, live it, love it. You learn so much from exploring and being creative and thinking outside the box a little bit and not worrying about what other people have to say about you. Life goes on whenever you have a great idea, or if you don't have a good idea.
Yeah. Good advice. Advice that we all should probably heed. So.
I'm taking that advice today for myself. Just keep doing it.
Man.
Just keep thinking.
Hey, pleasure.
Thank you, Jason.
Do it again soon.
Yeah.
Aaron, you rock. Folks, follow him on Instagram, follow him on YouTube, and you will be hearing much more from this artist in the future. We'll definitely do a round 2 and a round 3. This kind of was a round 2 since we had him on the podcast before, but I have such a great time chatting with artists like Aaron, and I get so inspired. I had such a great time playing with him all week and can't wait to do it again soon. If you'd like to reach out to the podcast, feedback at Contrabass Conversations will put you in touch with me and the team, and I respond to each and every email that comes in. So please reach out and let me know if you have any ideas for future guests or topics, or just to say hi and let me know a little bit about yourself. That would be great. Contrabass Conversations is produced by Michael Cooper, Steve Hinchy, Trevor Jones, and Mitch Mooring. Mitch makes beautiful basses in the Dallas area, and you can learn more at mitchmooring.com. And thank you so much to Krista Copper for going through and cataloging all the topics we talk about here. It is a truly monumental task, so thank you to Krista. And thank you, folks, for listening. I totally appreciate it. I'm your host, Jason Heath, and we will see you again soon for more life on the low end of the spectrum.